Hey, Brass Facts here. A little late to the party on civilians and body armor, but I actually kind of want to take it in a completely different direction. Yes, at the bare minimum, we should be able to use anything law enforcement officers, government agents, military use, and more, which sure as shit includes body armor, specifically hard rifle-rated armor, and also an M203. I really want an M203. So at minimum, I will wear body armor out of spite every time a brovet or whatever politician tells me I shouldn't have it. But that's not what this is about. Today I want to talk about why and when to use body armor, specifically hard rifle rated body armor, level 3, level 3 plus, level 4. I've discussed at length about how soft, concealable level 3A armor is actually the tits, and you should own some. It's a great tool in the toolbox with far less downsides and typically costs far less than a hard armor setup. And honestly, far more use cases and far more scenarios make sense for soft armor as it does hard armor. But today's topic is that rifle-rated armor. For preparedness, it's not just enough to own stuff for the sake of owning stuff, though I certainly have my fair share of that. I'm looking at you, PPK, but you have to understand the why, when, and how, or also known as the circumstance. I'm not talking about I own armor to stop bullets. I'm talking about the exact circumstance, mission, or scenario where I would realistically put on this piece of kit. This is not an irrelevant discussion that can be answered by when I feel like it. Because if that is your approach to preparedness, not only is that mentally lazy, but it also very likely means a lot of your kit will either be under-equipped or over-equipped. Therefore, your gear should be purchased by what you want to accomplish, not by buying gear and then finding a mission for it, which sadly is currently the norm. Thus, this gets to the video, I haven't really seen a good discussion or analysis of what the civilian mission is that calls for hard armor. And most people seem to own body armor because you should own body armor, and that's about the extent of the discussion or thought process. That's what I want to talk about today. The usual lame-ass disclaimer. I have not been there nor done that, so when talking about employment of body armor, understand I am not an SEM, however I did talk to several that have been there and have done that, including, for this video, a combat medic with about 5 years of experience overseas and then experience both dealing with trauma, care, and medical on the ground, as well as continued care on, like, say, a helicopter moving to a local field hospital, as well as a lot of experience, CONUS, in law enforcement as a medic with a number of scenarios under the belt. I'm being specifically vague here for obvious reasons, but even with that, it is stressed on how unique medical experiences and situations are, and that no man or woman's experience can really sum up the sum total of knowledge required to fully understand this. So at the end of the day, this is just a slice of the pie, means to serve as a discussion, self-reflection on why you, as a citizen, will or will not use armor in specific scenarios. Lightning fast, some housekeeping. I usually thank the viewer and subscribe star at the end of the video, but today, I'm gonna throw that up front and center. This channel is on the precipice of potentially being something I can do as a side gig or even as a full-time thing, maybe. Or it has the potential of sliding to the sidelines as I kind of have to focus on actually developing a real career. So regardless of how it turns out, I want to thank everyone for getting me this far, especially those that click on videos that they might not actually be interested in, but they click on it anyway to give me a chance and to give me that view. YouTube views poor for whoring videos quite negatively, so every little bit helps. Similarly, thank you to the subscribe stars. It means a lot, not just monetarily, that someone is willing to fork over some moolah to support this endeavor, also that they're willing to kind of put their vote of confidence in making this a reality. So if this shit show does somehow, quote unquote, make it, well, it will be off of your guys' backs. So thank you. On with the show, body armor, and you. Let's discuss what body armor doesn't give you. Invulnerability to gunfire. Yeah, most people understand this. However, it's important to reiterate how little of your body is actually covered by a typical civilian plate system. So a 10 by 12 on both front and back, maybe side plates. And even in the dream circumstance of taking direct fire aimed at your plate, the splash zone will often be larger than said plate. Even in CQB, where the cone of fire is quite small, you'll probably still get hit outside of the plates. Add in the fact that a smart adversary will potentially shift fire up or down during recoil to accommodate for the realization that you are indeed wearing armor, or a more reasonable explanation, people tend to shoot low under stress. The conclusion is basically foregone. Armor is there to protect you from taking a hit to the majority of your vital areas, not to make an unstoppable Call of Duty tier juggernaut out of you. This ties into what armor does give you. Protection against a common rifle round to an area on your body with some of the highest density of moderately important organs and blood vessels, which also happens to be the area typically where most people with both training and without training will instinctively shoot. In practice, this plays out to a lesser degree, quoting both medical and military stuff, that friend I mentioned earlier. For CONUS, the stats roughly indicate, in this scenario at least, that about 25% of the patients presenting to the ER with a gunshot wound have one in the thorax, which is the area being discussed for armor. About 80% will have a round to the arms or the legs, called the extremities, lower and upper, and about 10% to the gut, and about 30% to the head or neck. Now, some of the highly educated mathematicians among you will notice that these percentages do not add up to 100, but that is because it's a percent likelihood of where you will sustain a hit, not the makeup percentage of hits, if that makes sense. Put another way, a lot of gunshot victims will come into the ER with multiple gunshots, hence these percentages. It's worth noting these are CONUS, Continental United States, gunshot wound cases, meaning the vast majority of these are conducted with handguns at near point blank range. This sort of explains some of the survival rate on the far right column. Also, the gunshot wounds to the head, I'm going to go out and say there is a decent likelihood these are inflated due to suicide attempts, which will grossly inflate the number, right? Because you would remove that for quote-unquote gunfight metrics. And this would explain the statistic because I don't think most gangsters are crack headshot machines. Or maybe they are. As you push out the average range via the usage of rifles and bring military stats into the picture, which was derived from logic, talking to that medic, as well as stats that I looked up online, we can observe something slightly different, but still mostly congruent with what has been mentioned so far. Most observed gunshot hits that weren't to the armor were logically to the extremities, much like we've seen here. We're going to mostly ignore frag and overpressure related injuries, which were actually the majority of wounds and casualties, but it's not something that's related to civilians as much, unless there's a shipment of goodies going around that I'm not aware about. There was also, anecdotally, a lot of armpit hits mentioned, perhaps to illustrate that side profile shots are actually far more common than logic might dictate. However, this might also just be a case of survivor bias in terms of statistics, right? Most shots go to the thorax, and it's one of the areas that isn't protected by armor. Regardless, these impacts are generally quite brutal due to the quantity of blood vessels near the surface and honestly the not great performance of just gauze alone to solve the problem, right? You can't really tourniquet the entire thorax. And it represents one of the more difficult wounds to deal with along with a gut wound. Due to the existence of armor, limb wounds were the really common wound to be sustained. This area is quite survivable. The general TLDR is this. If you get shot, you will get shot in the face and die, get hit on a part of body that will not kill you immediately, or you'll get hit in the plate. 2 out of these 3 scenarios, you don't die right away. Now that's not 2 out of 3 percentage chance, that's just 2 out of 3 scenarios. Even those femoral wounds, if you get a TQ on it fast enough, are survivable if you get to higher care soon enough and probably an infusion. Statistically speaking, if you are stable enough to survive the casevac, the car ride, the ambulance, and you arrive on the ER table alive, you're going to make it. This is backed up by the extremely high survival rate of both civilians, CONUS, and infantry in regards to gunshot wounds that aren't instantaneous showstoppers. The wide-scale adoption of TQs also have come a long way to manage the stuff that would usually be a death sentence. All of the above sells the point of armor. If you don't die right away, our medical system is quite advanced to the point that you will likely survive if you reach higher care, which is generally something you can expect in modern society. And armor covers one of the largest areas and densities of vital, important things, your lungs and your heart. Oh, really good case for armor so far. However, one final point to make regarding the why before launching into the when it makes sense to use body armor, let's cover some of the downsides. First off, it's overt. If you're wearing hard rifle rated armor plates, most people will know because they look like bricks. Most heavy armor setups don't even try to bother hiding this fact at this point because we keep strapping load-bearing additions to it. You can sometimes blur the line between soft and hard armor via very thin, form-fitting hard armor plates under a bulky jacket, but this is both seasonal dependent and not even that effective on closer inspection. Weight. Now, I'm not saying armor will weigh you down to the point where you're combat ineffective, and the lack of armor will make you move super fast and avoid getting shot, though I will cover some of that. And if that's the case, you need to look at your physical ability if you can't run and gun in armor. What I'm saying is armor, via the weight, reduces your endurance and your other load-carrying capability. In some scenarios, this fact is irrelevant, but in some scenarios, this is critical. More on that in a bit. Armor is also prohibitively large and expensive, not in the sense that no one can afford it. But I'm more talking for scenarios where you can plan and execute on a plan. Well, it's irrelevant because you can just decide, hey, I'm going to wear the armor or I'm not going to wear the armor. But in some circumstance, it's so unfeasible to have an expensive armor system stashed on standby, or it's so large and bulky that you just can't bring it with you as a backup plan. Finally, the soft factor. People tend to be a lot more stupid with armor and less risk adverse. While not technically a downside because you still prefer the armor, once again quoting that medic, but the inverse situation when soldiers leave the wire without armor, they are far less willing to commit to fights or close to close range or generally do things inconducive to their continued existence on this plane of reality. But as soon as that armor goes on, a lot of people try to get their hua on, and frankly lean on their armor and medical infrastructure as a crutch. This absolutely applies to small unit scenarios, which is what most citizens would fall into. Okay, we got the why out of the way. Let's discuss the when. When does it make sense to put these heavy-ass bricks on? I'm going to go through escalating scenarios, and you can sort of figure out where you personally fit in and what you're preparing for, because we're all preparing for different things. Day-to-day life. This goes without saying? No, not really. Not only would very, very few people voluntarily subjugate themselves to the torture of wearing an armor plate in their day-to-day life, but a lot of the advantages of wearing said armor really go out the window when you functionally consider it's not too dissimilar from open carry. And the number one threat you'll encounter could just as easily been handled by soft armor, pistol rounds. While you can conceivably have an armor system, for example for home defense, next to your home defense gun, personally for me, this is more of an afterthought or a niche thing, as the time it takes to don body armor in a home defense scenario is quite unlikely, and home defense scenarios tend to occur in a rapid fashion. Also, as an aside, Velcro is loud as fuck. Now, if you already own hard armor for other reasons, yeah, send it. No downside in having the armor, as an option if you feel the circumstance allows it. I just wouldn't really view it as a rule, and if you're purchasing it for this scenario in exclusivity, then I think it doesn't make sense. Soft armor would do just as well, and is far more versatile. Civil unrest. There's a lot of civil unrest going around recently. You get civil unrest. You get civil unrest. You get the idea. While I'm of the opinion that, relatively speaking, we ain't seen nothing yet, and compared to historical and actual ongoing situations outside of the United States, this has been a pretty soft boil. But it's still good to prepare, in the context of being in the shit, in the civil unrest scenario, intermingling with the actual event, as in you move through or into the hot zone. This includes trying to get home, through it, or if for whatever reason you decide to enter the area, perhaps to evac a friend or a loved one or something. I still think no. I think the usage of concealed soft armor is the ticket here if you want to wear an armor system. Not only do you typically have more coverage for more relevant threats, but it's far more realistic to conceal soft armor, and you don't really gain the upsides of hard armor, nor do you gain the downsides of said hard armor. Specifically, in these scenarios, we've noticed a lot of attempting to single out those that are different, that are armed, that are tactical looking, or simply look out of place because of very well how you hold yourself, which changes from what you're doing that day, right? If you're showing up to be like, oh, hey, look, let's go see what the riders are doing. Oh, neat, they're burning down the McDonald's. I wonder if the Frosty machine still works. Versus you rolling in with some armor and a mindset of, oh, shit, I need to get my friend out before it's too late. Visible armor adds massively to that posture of why you're there. I hate the term gray man because it's been brutalized beyond recognition, but you want to not stick out. This is very much a scenario where the advantage gained by being slightly harder to kill for a rifle is vastly outweighed by just not being a visible target in the first place. You just ain't worth the squeeze here. The conversation extends to the usage of a rifle in this scenario. That is both another opinion and a topic for another day. Now, there are scenarios where you might decide, I'm overt, baby, let's go. If you and your homies decide you're going to go roof Korean mode and defend your business or maybe even your community with like a community watch, defense, presence patrol, whatever, which I can actually see becoming more of a thing as we begin to escalate beyond the level we've seen so far, and more urban/rural areas get involved, yeah, armor starts to make a lot of sense. Because at that point, you are a overt, near-stationary target, and the cat's out of the bag. Like, it's obvious. And I'd venture to say, you and 4 other dudes dressed up like G.I. Joe catalogs have both a practical benefit due to the addition of a rifle and armor, and scarecrow-like benefits, as in would-be assailants would decide maybe to try somewhere else. The benefits, as discussed, are not insignificant, and if you ever do get hit, the armor more than likely means you won't sustain a life-ending hit. So in these scenarios, as long as good medical skills are present, your odds of survival go way up. We've observed this in effect, both in civilian and law enforcement officers who take frankly comical amounts around to the armor, body, or whatever, and survive. Disaster scenarios, government partial collapse, whatever. I've touched on that. I'll put a playlist down below if you want to really get more into the event and less into one specific aspect, like armor. Another type of event, natural disaster. Think Katrina level where local infrastructure goes bleh. I think it's variable. Most of the time, people are going to be busy surviving, and you walking around playing dress up will really only at best alienate you, and worse, paint a target on your back as a prepared citizen. But open warfare doesn't really occur in these localized scenarios. However, on the flip side, we did notice some degree of organized looting, and having that armor on tap could play dividends, especially in a society that is becoming increasingly more divided. And many people may seek this opportunity to, well, go after targets they wouldn't normally go after. And with the extreme proliferation of AR-15s in America, means, yeah, maybe let's put that armor on, or at minimum, have it on standby. So typically, I would go into a scenario like this with a soft armor handgun, maybe a PDW, as the primary quote-unquote loadout, with a hard armor plus rifle system being a break glass in case of roving gangs solution. Finally, complete WROL. Collapse. Shit hit the fan. Boogaloo. Or whatever weird-ass name is currently in vogue to describe the Fallout-esque collapse of society scenario, whatever. I think this is really why most citizens are buying hard armor beyond the simple case of, I can. So when the boog comes kicking, it's finally time. We can wear that armor. It's time to do hood rat shit with the boys. No. Double back to our pros and our cons in the reality of wearing armor, especially a 10x12 style PC armor. Suddenly, a lot of the benefits we discussed of that armor fail to materialize in a world where there is no functional society, right? Unlike with the previous examples and stats, we don't have a casevac or we don't have an ambulance to bring us to an ER because there is no ER. The best ER you're gonna get is being evac'd on foot to a kitchen table with some plastic drapes, and that is your highest level of care, as your friends tried to figure out how to make you die more comfortably. The reality is this. Even an extremity wound, which are extremely survivable, both immediately after taking the wound and intermittently afterwards, so think hours after, are really hard to deal with long-term and at end-of-time scenarios. Asking that medic, once again, they had near zero confidence that they could stave off infection and sepsis, even with a lot of equipment on hand. And more likely than not, you're going to punch your time card after a week or so. Recall the circumstance. You have a dirty-ass bullet in you. Your friends likely use dirty-ass hands to slap a dirty-ass God's bandage that's 20 years old on top of the wound, and then they shipped you off to wherever. Actually, they didn't ship you off anywhere. There's nowhere to go. Beyond the obvious miracle chance of complete healing, the best-case scenario is looking a lot like just cut the bitch off and then hope the new wound doesn't get infected, as an amputation. And that, so far, is just discussing wounds that are actually survivable beyond a couple hours. Take a look at some other wounds like gut shots, which are basically lights out without surgery, in very quick order. Too many blood vessels down there and no way really to patch them up beyond stuffing the entrance wound. Combined with the likelihood of having a hole in your digestive system leaking all kinds of nasty in there, yeah, the best course of action really quickly becomes Game of Thronesian, just give me something for the pain and let me die. Right? Even some of the non-instantaneous death vectors, femoral bleed, armpit wound, will result in death so rapidly you should have just taken it to the face and gotten it over with. We still doing that, what she said? Without the ability to conduct surgery, insert IVs and transfusions, most of these are actually not survivable anymore. And once again, even if you do survive it, the inability to properly deal with the infection part means you're functionally just surviving so you can be miserable and get your goodbyes in order. The list goes on, but I think we get it. This has become an essay on why getting into gunfights is such a fucking bad idea, and why often I preach that even the best, most squared away team of dudes will likely be attrition to less than half after only 2 to 3 gunfights, and that's even assuming they're winning, which won't be the case for, most of us. So the question is, did I just make the argument that armor for the end of times is stupid? There is some benefit to running a tiny ass plate on your chest and back, even without the existence of higher medical care. The actual functional costs of armor, not the dollar cost, but the cost of wearing it, are actually fairly cheap considering what it does give you. Increased odds of immediate survival. You get hit in an area, you can potentially still continue to assist in the fight. This will obviously depend on the psyche of the person. You can also get extremely lucky and take a hit, and only 1 hit or 2 hits, to the plate, and you get a second lease on life. While I don't typically advocate for CQB in this type of scenario, it goes without saying, sometimes you don't have a choice. A building needs to be cleared because you're in that building now. And in these scenarios, it lets you complete your task, i.e. you're covering a corner and you begin taking fire. You don't just yield that corner immediately because you took a round to the chest. Or you're in a breach and you're committing to a corner and you've taken some rounds that are soon to be lethal. However, as long as you didn't get it to the kisser, you'll have your chance to return some rounds back to the sender, ending him, protecting your teammates from suffering the same fate as you. There are, of course, other scenarios where armor buys you time and capability, and more, but you get the idea. The flip side, if I were to wear armor in an end-of-time scenario, I will wear armor for the urban type mission, be it working at my home, doing hood rat shit under the cover of dark, firewatch, or observing an area. When the distance covered is under 10 miles, gross kit weight is under 40 pounds, probably 30 pounds minus the rifle, it makes sense to have armor. However, once the requirement exists that I need support equipment, or the armor inhibits me from doing what I want to do, i.e. going somewhere in X period of time relative to my fitness level at that moment, and more importantly, the status and health of myself, right? You're not going to be that healthy in these scenarios. Or my equipment loadout begins to exceed 35-40 pounds, I will potentially look to drop the armor system to retain that mobility. Because having that extra support and survival equipment allows you to avoid, if you run out, making stupid decisions. Because if you run out of food, water, or are freezing to death, these are going to be far more detrimental to your survival versus the loss of something, say, 30% of the time able to take a bullet. Similarly, if these support systems are mandatory, and you want to bring armor, let's see how that plays out. You're going to be about at 60 pounds of gross weight, meaning you either begin to become combat ineffective in a gunfight, that's a lot of weight to sprint with, or, as military SOP often dictates, you're going to jettison that gear and finish the fight. But unlike in the military, if you do end up deciding to break contact at some point, which is extremely likely, you're going to probably leave that gear behind. And you don't have the entire support structure of the US military to bail you out, and you'll probably just die of exposure or the ensuing stupid decisions you have to make to regain that support gear. Alright, that was quite the discussion. At the end of the day, I'm not saying don't buy armor. I'm just saying analyze where it lies in your continuum of what do I need to buy to be prepared. Personally for me, I think armor is excellent to own because it's a very, very useful tool in the toolkit. And outside of end of the world times, it is a serious game changer when it justifies its use case. Even in the end of times without an advanced medical structure, it still brings a lot to the table. It's not to just let you walk open in a field and take a round and move away hunky-dory. It's not there to bail you out of your mistakes. It's there to offer a very slight increase in survivability, specifically when there's no higher medical care, and to sometimes let you, quote-unquote, finish the fight. Put another way, armor is far more nuanced than yes, I live, no, I don't live. Right? Okay. Hopefully this was a useful video to help turn those gears, make people think about armor in their system. I almost universally think everyone needs armor. I just think it's vastly overstated when armor is and is not useful. Both sides of that story. I think that was a long one, so let's get you out of here. Thanks for watching. Feel free to comment down below what you think when you think armor makes sense and when it doesn't. Yeah, that's all I got. Here's some dog footage to ease the mood a little bit.
There you go. Go for it.
Thirsty bitch. Not you.
Come on, drink some water. They're hot, right? Nice and toasty.
Literal hot dog.
A nice warm loaf.
So